Got it. Recording in progress. Good evening, Larry and Pam and iPhone. Hopefully we'll get a few more people on here for the 6th episode. We have a distinguished guest speaker tonight, Lynn Lyons. It's not doctor. Do you have a PhD, Lynn? I don't want to.
I do not. I have an MSW.
So social worker Lyons is here, Lynn Lyons. And we're happy to have you, Lynn. And you probably know Larry Elliott, who works in education and care such. Have you guys met?
I don't know that. Have we met, Larry?
I've attended several of your workshops and have met you, yes.
Okay, of course. Oh, Larry, right, Larry.
And Pam, I can't see you, nor iPhone 879, but thank you, ladies and gentlemen, or ladies. And if you choose to turn on your camera and brave the digital world with us, we'd appreciate it. But if not, we're glad you came, and we'll see if anyone else comes. But let me, may I share the screen, Abby?
I believe so. Oh, yeah, you can. Yep, you're good.
I'm just going to show you the announcement for tonight. COVID and Beyond, Raising Kids in the Digital Age. The 6th webinar, the 6 Eyes, the 6 Eyes. And I'll read this, indulge me. The 6 Eyes are imagination, independence, integrity, intestinal fortitude, and intimacy, which all together allow kids to figure out their identity, the 6th eye. However, those traits are in low supply in many kids. Fortunately, those things can be taught remedially. This webinar will cover how to give your kids these gifts. And then here are the links conveniently located for the first 5 episodes, and so on. And there's Judge Broderick, who I don't think can make it on tonight. So the 6 Eyes, I must admit, in the presence of another social worker, are heavily borrowed from Erik Erikson's The 8 Ages. But it occurred to me a year and a half or 2 years ago that as I watched how can I put this? Certainly for 20 years, I feel like I've been watching changes in the culture which aren't kind to kids and families. And Lynn Lyons, I'll introduce in a minute, has studied and written and spoken extensively. Lynn, is this fair about anxiety in kids?
Anxiety in families, because I don't think it just shows up in kids. I don't think they created it. I don't think that they make it worse. I think they have lots of help.
Becoming anxious. Okay. I do feel like the antidote from some angle is the 6 Eyes, that certainly when we grew up, we had these things, and we had a lot of, we used our imaginations. We were allowed to be increasingly independent, age appropriately, and sometimes a little too early, as I rode my bike at midnight at the age of 12 through the streets of suburban Boston. When I talk about, just introduce these things, when I talk, certainly imagination, iPhones do not engender imagination. The new parenting playbook has a lot of folks preventing their kids from enjoying a sense of burgeoning independence. When I speak about integrity, I don't necessarily mean cheating in school, although I haven't read the studies on this, Lynn, maybe you have, but I think kids are doing more cheating in school, certainly, than back in the day. But I more mean the integrity of the developing ego, of the developing identity. Mm-hmm. Integrity. More on this later. Intestinal fortitude, which is a synonym for guts, but guts doesn't begin with I, so we didn't want 5 I's and a G. But anybody who's coaching kids will say that they don't have as much resilience and guts and courage as they used to. I don't think that's arguable. And the 5th one is intimacy. It's clear to me that kids are having a lot of sexual relations at younger and younger ages, and Lynn can perhaps speak on any and all of this. The sexting is out of control, but I'm not quite sure kids are developing the skills to be truly intimate, close with their friends and their boy and girlfriends and so on, and other people. And indeed, and Lynn, I'd love you to address this in your comments. these first 5 I's, and I can type them in the chat, I'll cut and paste them. I'm firmly of the belief that without enough of all of those 5 qualities, I think it's very difficult to develop a solid identity. And I'll close with this, and then Lynn, I want you to be able to address folks. Hi, Mr. McGowan, how are you? Lynn will speak to this. My phone is ringing off the hook. Hi, Christine. My phone is ringing off the hook with kids of college age who simply cannot engage with the stream of life. They're failing to launch. And it's my postulate that they don't have enough of those 5 I's and some other ingredients to develop a solidifying identity, and they don't know what they're doing.
Mhm.
And they increasingly don't know who they are or want to be, and they can't function in college, and they end up home, whether they get a part-time job or play video games in the basement, or worse, if their mental health is worse. But a lot of kids in this country are failing to launch,
Mhm.
and I think it's an identity sort of crisis. So let me be quiet and introduce everybody. Christine and Mr. McGowan, we have the pleasure of having Lynn Lyons on the call tonight to talk to us about her observations and experiences with kids and families. So all yours, Lynn.
Well, I think you're exactly right. Thank you, Jeff, for having me. It's nice to be here. Hi, everybody. I think, you use the word intimacy and I use the word connection, because I think connection has just gotten so skewed. And it's interesting too, when you talk about iPhones not being imagination or independence. I feel like we've given them these devices that I call them certainty devices, right? Because you can know everything, or you think you can know everything. Your parents can know everything about you. They can know where you are. You can know where they are. You can know where your friends are. You can know where your girlfriend is, your boyfriend is. So this idea of being able to sort of tolerate uncertainty, tolerate not knowing, is really the skill that I see in terms of anxiety. Anxiety has this expectation that you're going to know how everything is going to show up, how everything is going to go. And what they, I agree with everything you said, Jeff. I think the inability to connect in genuine, authentic ways, and that being replaced by this really bizarre type of connection that kids experience, I think is really causing a lot of problems in relationships. I think that we have to remember, we like to think of ourselves as rational beings, right? We really value our ability to think. Thinking is great, but our social emotional aspects are far more powerful than our rational aspects. And the social and emotional stuff for kids is just really, it's powerful. The pandemic got in the way of a lot of it in terms of their ability. If you talk to anybody who teaches 9th grade these days, they had a class of 9th graders coming in that missed all the messiness of middle school, where they were supposed to bang into each other and figure things out, and come into 9th grade a little bit more put together. And they're saying they're not. So what I see, and I don't think the pandemic caused all this. I know, Jeff, you don't either, because the numbers weren't good before the pandemic. I think it really comes down to, how do we teach kids to connect? How do we teach them to, I could come up, you want me to give you my 5 C's in addition to your 6 I's? They're very close to yours, actually.
We can have 11 I's and C's. Let's do it.
Okay. Creativity, character, courage, connection. And there was one more, now I forget.
Creativity.
Creativity, character,
Yeah.
courage, connection.
Yeah.
And then certainty begins, or I want to be uncertainty, so I cheated a little bit, but the ability to not know how life is going to go.
So let me, I want to digest that. I put that in the chat.
Yeah.
Creativity, character, courage, connection,
Mm-hmm.
and the ability to be uncertain about things.
Yep.
which is part of character and part of courage, right? It's part of all of that.
Yeah.
I think it's brilliant.
Well, I mean, it's, we all like, my name's Lynn Lyons, so I like alliteration. What I see, when I talk about these certainty devices, it was funny. I was in front of a bunch of high schoolers yesterday. I was down in a school talking to high school students, which sometimes goes well and sometimes doesn't. It depends on the day. But I was able to really, I left them with the statement, all the groups I talked to, I left them with the statement that I wanted them to go home and tell their parents that they needed to get rid of Life 360, that the tracking apps, that parents knowing exactly where kids are all the time, the intrusiveness of that. Oh, the other C was communication. Yeah. So the inability, well, here's what I think. The tracking apps, I think, if you know where your kids are all the time, because you can look on a phone, what that gets in the way of is teaching them the skill of responsibly communicating. They don't have to do it. So when my son was, I have two boys, they're 21 and 23 now. When my son played on the Concord baseball team, before he had his license, because he was a little squirt, and I was going to go pick him up at the game. And it was his job to text me what time the bus was pulling into the parking lot. It was his job to pay attention to whether or not they stopped at Wendy's, or there was traffic at the Hooksett Toll, or whether his friend Alex's dad was going to pay. It was his job to communicate with me because I was going to wait and pick him up. And we give kids these devices so parents can know. It completely absolves him of any responsibility that he has to disconnect from his friends for a minute and say, oh, wait, guys, I got to let my mom know what time she has to be there to pick me up, just out of basic courtesy. And I think that when the more that we remove the ability for kids to just learn the skill of communicating responsibly, of talking about what's going on inside of them, of having face-to-face conversations. There's another thing that I've been talking about with kids a lot since they've sort of come out of their cocoons, is that the phrase that I refer to as awkward empathy. Awkward empathy is the ability to have a conversation with somebody who's going through something difficult and to not know exactly what to say and to feel uncomfortable and to bumble through it, but to express your caring and your connection to that person. And I think we're not doing that enough with kids. Giving
Lynn,
them skill. Yeah.
I must say your description of the phone as a certainty device is really like many things that are simple and brilliant. It just crystallized in my head what I've been watching for 15 years.
Yeah.
I refer to it as childhood interruptus.
Yeah.
It is also, it creates I mean, I have my flip phone, I joke about it, and I'm addicted to it.
Yeah.
But it does create this illusion of connection and certainty. And that's the way it was designed. And I'll give you the floor again in a second, but if you watch The Social Dilemma, the show on Netflix, it's absolutely chilling. And we've talked in past episodes, one of the episodes was called Elephants and Gremlins. And Lynn, the elephants we call them also the overwhelming tragedy list, but from global warming to divisiveness in Washington to phone addiction, ironically, the phone gives you this idea that, well, everything's okay. And it feels really bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny you say, what did you say? Childhood interruptus?
Childhood interruptus.
But when one of the interesting things that they're finding is with these tracking apps, and Life 360 actually just got nailed because they're selling data. So all these parents are tracking their kids and all the data is being sold to.
That's shocking. Do you mean they actually lacked integrity and sold the data?
I know it's shocking, but it's true.
The McGowan laughing, thank God. Yeah.
Yeah. But what it's showing is that if you start tracking your child at an early age, you don't stop. And that's one of the things that I was beginning to recognize, is that these parents would say, well, when she's in high school, it's important, or when she's in middle school, it's important. But when she goes away to college, I won't keep tracking her. And when she goes away to her career, I won't keep tracking her. I was at a school, a private school in Toronto. The head of the school, the headmistress of the school, confessed to me that she tracks her 26-year-old daughter who's in a PhD psychology program on the other side of the country. And she does it. She said, I just got so used to knowing exactly where she was.
Yeah, it curdles my blood, but we don't have kids, and I fancy myself to be a bright guy and so on. But I think people, Lynn, get sucked into some of these new technologies or new habits. And as you're implying, before you know it, you're tracking your 17-year-old. But it struck me as wait a minute. I know that they track animals to hunt them.
Mhm.
And some people enjoy tracking and seeing where in, but tracking your kids just struck me. I mean,
It's bizarre.
it struck me as bizarre. It
Yeah,
does.
but so much of what has happened over the last 10 years has really been normalized. And so when you step back and look at it, and when I talk to parents and I tell these stories, a mom said to me, I just want to know that his head is on the pillow when he's in his dorm at night, right? He's in college. I just want to know. And I said, do you want to know who else's head is on the pillow?
I
Because
was
that's
just going to say that'll be the extra addition. You can find out who he's sleeping with.
right, right. And so there's just this sense that we're supposed to know. I think also the interesting thing that's happening too is that parents are really shamed if they're not as intrusive as other parents. So you are thought of as a real, like you are negligent. You are not a good parent if you don't get your kids a smartphone by the time they're in 4th grade, gosh, what a terrible parent you are. And then if you're not tracking them, if you don't know exactly where they are, if you're not hiring a college coach to help them do their application and figure out what schools to apply to, all of these things that are all things of privilege, right? That these are like, we can give our kids all these things, but you are held up as an example of a bad parent if you're not doing these things for kids.
Lynn, what's your analysis of how we got to Life 360 and how do you explain the new parenting playbook that I think a lot of us have found ourselves sucked into? My wife, Miranda, who's on the call, and I have talked endlessly about this, and I'd love anybody to weigh in. How did we get here so quickly in a scant 10, 15, 20, 25 years? Because none of us was raised this way.
Well, I mean, I think that technology made it easy to do, right? So think about, if we think about all the things these phones allow us to do. So think about when we were kids. If you wanted to play with your friend, you had to call your friend. And if they didn't answer, there was no answering machine. I think my first answering machine was in graduate school. There was no answer. Either the phone rang and rang and rang, somebody answered it, or there was a busy signal. If it rang, and you had no way of knowing exactly what was going to happen. So I remember I'd call my friend. I want to play with Darcy. And the phone would ring and ring. And I would say to my mom, where's Darcy? She said we were going to play today. And my mom would say, I don't know. I don't keep track of Darcy. And this idea that we can know everything all the time has given parents who we're now entering the generation of people who grew up with this technology too. We're sort of the last generation who didn't have all this technology at all growing up. But there is this idea that parents need to know all the time where their kids are. And it happened quickly because smartphones allow us to have the impression, I make a joke when I'm talking to parents. I say, remember when you couldn't remember the lyrics of a song? And you had to live with that, like for hours, you couldn't remember the lyrics of a song. Now you can go on your phone, oh, that's the lyric of the song. So there's no tolerance of not knowing. There's no tolerance. There's no time of, I don't know where you are. Call me when you get there. No, I can watch you. I can watch you driving on the road. So I think it happened so quickly because the technology allowed us to be as intrusive and seemingly certain as we possibly could be. Kids, of course, have figured out how to, if my mom was tracking me at college, I think I would just leave my cell phone under the pillow and then go out without her knowing where I was. But they don't want to leave without their cell phone. So they got to have 2 cell phones, one that they can put under their pillow and one that they can take with them. Yeah.
I've typed in the addiction to certainty, and I think that feels correct to me.
Mhm.
I think it's again, we're not parents, but the instinct to protect and know that your kid's okay is certainly part of the human condition. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Larry's a parent. Bill, I think you're a parent. Some of you other folks, if you're a parent, I mean, does anyone want, Lynn, you're saying so much that's so important. And that's the other thing that I think people haven't caught up with the analysis of this.
Mhm.
People aren't sure. Bill McGowan has typed in technology versus trust.
Yeah,
I think that's accurate.
yeah, yeah. Well, technology has become sort of, well, if I can't trust you, I can at least trust the phone, right? So I can trust that I will know things. And the thing I say to parents, which is, it's a really sort of harsh thing to say, but it's true, is that the way that I sort of went through the teenage years with my kids, not tracking them on their phones, 2 teenage boys, is that if something horrible happened to my kids, I would find out. Right? Someone would tell me. That's how it used to happen. And when my son did total his car, I found out. And I think it's this idea is that you're going to have a minute by minute, play by play of your child's life has become the expectation. How about, I mean, now I'm just sort of ranting, Jeff, but how about this thing when kids go to sleepaway camp? That there is a guy wrote an article about this in Outside Magazine that he interviewed.
I know, Lynn, I know I'm sitting down, but I might need to lie down for this. Go ahead.
But when you go to sleepaway camp, is that there's services now that the camp takes pictures of your kid all day long. And then they post them on a website. So at the end of the day, your kid is off at sleepaway camp. At the end of the day, mommy and daddy can go on the website and see what you did during the day. But there was a problem with that because some of the pictures they were posting, right? Jonah had a sad face on. So there was a picture of everybody sitting on the raft and Jonah was like this. And so then parents started calling the camp saying, I saw the picture you posted of Jonah. Can you go check on Jonah? He looks sad. Can you go find out if he's sad and come back to report us? And camps were struggling. This is what the article was about. Camps were struggling with the idea of should we post these pictures? Should we have contact with the parents? Should we invest in the face recognition software that then allowed the software to send to each parent the picture of their own child so they didn't have to scroll through the hundreds of pictures of all the other campers? And the whole goal is at the end of the day, I need to know, not that my child is just safe, not that my child is where they should be, but that my child was happy. I need to know that my child was happy, or else you're going to hear from me. And all of that technology is just intrusion, which, that independence is really the one of the most important I's there is. How do we let kids develop autonomy so that they can begin to figure things out without us being there to micromanage it?
Well, if you put the I's, independence and guts and integrity and intimacy, and the C's, creativity and character and courage, connection, and you begin to think that we are, without even thinking about it, systematically, I'm thinking of pesticide, sadly. I think we are really quickly, and I'd like to get Mr. McGowan, Larry's, anybody else's viewpoints on this, eradicating these basic building blocks of identity. It's so upsetting and scary. And it isn't coincidental that the suicide rate pre-COVID went up 60%. And Lynn talks about anxiety. And anyway, Bill, Larry, anybody on the call want to interject a little bit? I mean, we have such a small group that I want to offer that. Anybody?
It's interesting, again, technology was here pre-pandemic. But at the same time, the technology for the last 2 years has allowed us to continue to connect from an education standpoint, but at the same time, I think it's increased the reliance on technology. So, the good kind of extended the bad, and how do we, so we kind of went to the extreme, and, typically things go from extreme to extreme. So how do we pull it back based on what we've seen?
Well, they've done some interesting research, and there's people like Jean Twenge that as writes articles and makes this direct correlation, not causation, but this direct correlation between the amount of a screen and the likelihood a teenager is going to be depressed. But then they ferreted it out a little bit. I mean, what the pandemic has done, and you have to pay attention to the research from the pandemic, because the 2020 data looks very different than the 21 data and the 22 data. But what one of the things they looked at was, knowing that kids were so connected with technology during the pandemic, and for a lot of kids that was their only way of connecting, for a lot of adults too, they made a differentiation between active and passive use of social media. And if you were actively engaged in social media, so you were doing things like you were on a family chat, or you were having Zoom calls with people that you liked, or you were engaged in raising money for a cause, that actually was good. That helped us. Passive use of social media, they found really messed with particularly teenagers' sense of self, with their identity, with their moods. So lying in bed, scrolling, doing the social comparison, which they do, was very detrimental. So when I talk to teens about it, they don't want to hear like, grandpa on the porch saying, we got to get rid of that technology, but being able to help them differentiate between what is an active, a positive use of it, and how does it contribute to negative things for you. And they'll hear that a little bit, but I mean, they're addictive. Those phones are addictive.
Let me ask you two questions. One is, what do you think really is the effect of, we call it the overwhelming tragedy list, but the idea, at least at 65, the older folks on the call, the things that we worried about, if we worried globally, were Nikita Khrushchev and the Cold War, and God forbid, an atom bomb. But today, from global warming to shootings to all of it, how do you think that plays into how we're all doing? The overwhelming tragedy list, Lynn. Let me just leave it at that. How does that factor in?
I think that the visuals, the constant visuals that we get of the overwhelming tragedy, I think that one of the things that we're chipping away at now, and teenagers will tell you this, is a sense of hope, right? So positive expectancy, the belief that things will get better, the belief that things can change, that's one of the key elements of healing from anything. And I think with a constant onslaught and of the visuals of it, I think it's getting rid of their hope. I think the only saving grace, and if you talk to teenagers, they'll tell you this, is that they look at the adults as they're waiting for these adults to die off. They're waiting for these adults to be done so that they can step in and do better. That's sort of the thing that sort of keeps them engaged. Really? Is that they think that these idiots, they're going to go. These old dudes, they're going to go, and then we'll be able to step in.
That's so startling to me. Do you have? Is there research on that? Is that more?
No, this is just what they tell me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that apply just to old baby boomers like me, or are they talking about people their parents' age?
No, they're talking about, the old baby boomers like you.
Okay.
Yeah. They're looking at the people in power right now. So if you look right now, the people in power, the big bad people that they see doing awful things all look pretty similar.
White men.
That's right. That are about 70 years old.
Yeah.
So that's that, and I think that, and here's the other thing. So if we talk about positive expectancy and we talk about where they are now, there's another thing that really we have to pay attention to, is the messaging that they're getting about their mental health. Because in a lot of ways, it's doing the opposite of what we want it to do. So interesting research coming out. It's been around for a while in terms of individual treatment, and now we're looking at things like mental health awareness campaigns and always trying to decrease stigma, right? That's been the whole thing. We're trying to decrease stigma and allow kids to talk about it. They are absolutely doing a great job of talking about it, right? I mean, they want to talk about it all the time. And they are actually centralizing it as their identity, which is a bit problematic or very problematic for me. But what the research shows is that when we keep hammering the idea that this is a biological, genetic, chemical disease model, that actually does a few things. One is that individually, it makes people less willing to ask for help because there's nothing they can do. So it increases their pessimism about treatment helping. One interesting thing that it has done with college students is that if people know, if you say, I have depression or I have anxiety, and they find out you're not taking medication, stigma increases. Because they have been taught that this is a chemical imbalance and it's a medical problem. And why would you be so dumb as to not treat your depression? And so if they find out you're not taking medication, they think you're stupid. So that's the other thing the research shows. And then a current study, probably within the last 6 months, I would say, found that when we talk with depression and with schizophrenia, when we put it in the context of biology, medical model, that increases stigma in terms of what they measure is a person's willingness to move closer to this person, not physically, but to step in versus step back. So social withdrawal, they call it. So the more that we talk about, and what has happened in so many of these mental health awareness campaigns, like you look at, what's the grassroots campaign that is for working with suicide on college campuses? Something Minds. I'm having a.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I can't think of it either.
So they put out things and they say depression is like diabetes. And I saw a thing they put out that said, you can no sooner change your depression by changing the way you think than changing your diabetes by changing the way you think. And I thought, okay, so that's harmful, actually.
That sounds really evil, actually.
Yeah. And so, but this is what they've been taught, right? So this is a disease. This is biology. This is genetic, and there's nothing you can do about it. That is the exact opposite message that we want to give kids. And I'm actually heartened to see that the research is showing that message is actually increasing, not decreasing stigma. What decreases stigma is when people talk about the social factors that got them to the place that they are now. So it's about what happened to you, who you are as a human being, what is your history, and what was the journey that got you to this place right now where you need support and help. That brings people closer. And I think that kids need to hear that over and over and over again. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we have on this call, we want to talk about some solutions, as overwhelming as this discussion can be.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had another thought that's escaped me. Did anybody want to jump in at this point? iPhone or Pam or Christine, anybody? Larry? Let me know. Larry, you reaching for your mute button? No. This is how the Zoom goes. I see who's reaching their hand. How do you, so we have, I think, 2 or 3 parents and a couple of school people on there. And we've talked about this, Lynn, in past episodes. What do you do if you have kids in your home? And Lynn, you haven't talked about the subject that you're known for, anxiety. You have, but how do you lower kids' anxiety? How do you reassure them? And you use the H word of hope, which I think is indeed in very short supply. You know, Bill runs a high school, runs Winnicott. Christine teaches at Goffstown and so on. We have people on this call who deal with teens every day, and I think a couple of parents. My first suggestion, I have a couple, and Lynn, I'm curious what you think about this. I meant to ask you earlier. It seems to me that grown-ups en masse in the lives of kids, not their parents, not their math teacher, not their principal, nobody, is really just acknowledging that things feel really scary now. I don't think people are acknowledging that. So I say it every week. But to me, and Lynn, I'd love your opinion, that seems to me to be the first step to say, hey, kids, age appropriately, if you're in 2nd grade versus 10th grade or in college, but that things feel really overwhelming, and then start listening.
Yeah.
Lynn, what do you think of that advice, Lynn?
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice, because I think what we want to do is we want to normalize the very overwhelming and big and powerful feelings that kids are having. And so I see what I hear, Jeff, is I hear it goes in two directions. One is that we either invalidate them and say like, well, it's not so hard and you'll be fine and just keep working and get all A's and everything will work out, right? We want to be sort of invalidating in that way. Or we swing to the other scale that way. You know, that's not, and I think there is a huge sweet spot where we can really talk to kids and acknowledge and listen and help them put into words what it feels like right now to be in the world that they're in.
Right.
And to really listen, you know, emotional literacy, the ability to come up with words that describe what's going on inside of you, is one of the things we know that leads to better mental health outcomes. So we have to shut up. And they want to talk about these things. We've just got to give them some language that isn't so pathological, so that when they're feeling sad, they don't say, oh, I have depression. When their heart is broken, they say, my heart is broken. When they're feeling anxious and overwhelmed, you know, the two words, I say this all the time, I could not do my job without the two words, of course. Of course you feel that way. Of course you feel that way. I feel that way. Of course you feel that way. You know, when they say, oh, I'm so furious about what we're doing to the planet. Of course you feel that way. And so I think there's great benefit in having conversations with kids where you say, I'd really love to hear what you're thinking about this. I'd really love to hear your opinion about this, and let them talk. And stop jumping in and telling them what they do and don't feel, and stop telling them what's wrong with them, because they should be feeling overwhelmed. They should be feeling a little bit hopeless right now.
Right.
Yeah.
No question. And kids being kids, they don't feel well. They don't know why. So they latch onto the lexicon they hear grown-ups use, which is anxiety and depression.
That's
If
right.
I had a nickel for every time I heard, my son is anxious and depressed.
Yeah.
Sure. Because the word outcome fever is not in common parlance. But my view is that 95% of kids are afraid how they look, how they do, what they produce will be inferior, that their parents won't accept them, that they'll not get into a certain school, and so on. So I think we need to make that distinction too.
Yeah. Well, I jokingly say, you know, like everything is a panic attack now, right? So they're having panic attacks. And I say to kids, panic and attack, those are two really big words that you're putting together to describe some distress that you're feeling. So why don't you talk to me about how uncertain you feel, or how it's really hard to be in high school right now, or what, right? It's I'm having a panic attack. Yeah. The other thing, maybe you've noticed this too, Jeff, is that in the last probably 5 years, the language has changed, where instead of parents are saying, my kid is really struggling, or I'm worried about my child seems really depressed, is that they will say, my child has been diagnosed with. Constantly. Yep. I have people will email me the name of the person and their position in the organization and the date of the diagnosis. My child has been diagnosed with by so-and-so at so-and-so on so-and-so and so. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's super alarming. And if I thought, Lynn, that there weren't a solution, I would just retire and hide under a rock.
Mm-hmm.
I get sad sometimes at the showing of when the judge and I go places and so on, but including people on this call who have been kind enough to us, to the Reconnection Project, to want us to come around and work with educators and parents and kids. But I do think, as I said about 14 minutes ago, the first step is to just have this conversation with more people.
Yeah.
And that's,
and parents say to me, well, how do I open this conversation, right? Like, how do I have this conversation? What if we're in a family that we don't really talk about this stuff, and it seems kind of weird that suddenly I'd be like, hey, tell me about your feelings. And I say to parents to just say, hey, you know, I've been noticing lately. Like, that's such a good opening line. Like, I've been noticing lately. And give them a little bit of your observations and then say, what do you think? You know, it's just a good way to just sort of open the conversation. And I say all the time, the earlier the better, but it's never too late. You know, and you know, if you're thinking, gosh, my kid is 18 or my kid is 16 or 15 and we don't really talk about this and that would be weird. Just own it. Say, you know, this is weird. Like, I know we don't talk about this stuff and I'm just going to sort of bumble through this a little bit, but I just want to say this to you. Like, I'm really aware of how hard it is to be 15 right now. And I'm super proud of how you've handled everything. And, you know, I don't have the right words exactly to say it all the time. I mean, just say it, say it, say it, say it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love it. You know, the 6 I's, the 5 C's, specific ways to get kids to be creative and connected and imaginative and independent. I mean, I don't think any of this is rocket science. But, Lynn, I'd love to invite you to talk about it. How can we, and I'll try to find them in the chat and put the 11 words back down there. But what can we do, or Christine, what have you done? I think you teach math, maybe history, Christine. I'm not sure that I remember, but what can we do as parents and teachers and therapists and school principals to bring back those qualities that we all learn by osmosis automatically? What comes to mind, Lynn?
Well, like one of the things, just
Christine, yeah, go ahead.
as a whoops, sorry, hold on. As a parent of, well, 2 older kids now, I used to find my kids wouldn't open up if they walked through the door and I said, how was your day? But if I could get to the point where I could pick them up from school during that drive home, when I would just say, how was your day? They were as chatty as could be. I live close to one of the schools, and if I could get up, so my high school gets out earlier than both of their schools got out before they hit high school. If I could even walk to their school and make them walk home with me, I got so much useful conversation time out of the kids by doing that. But I feel like the minute you would walk through the door, they were off into their own whatever they needed to do. But
Is that what you think made the difference, Christine? Is that they were sort of in that transition thing, and you weren't walking into the house and everybody sort of go and start doing their things? It was that transition. It
was huge. It was very, like, I always knew what was going on in my kids' lives because of that prime time. Now, obviously, it got a little tougher once they got their driver's licenses, right? Because even though they were driving to the same high school as me, they didn't want to drive in the same car as me. But you know, we dealt with that. But I do think that, yeah, I do think in the classroom we're trying really hard. Like, for instance, we do Friday podcasts during advisory period, and right now we're trying to get at how kids feel socially and emotionally, and so we're asking questions on surveys that I still am not up on this technology, just hold their phones up and scan QR code, and then boom, it gets them into a questionnaire. Right. And we have very low participation in 1,100 kids in the building. I think after asking advisors to make sure their kids were doing this, we still only had 273 kids last week participate. And of the 273 kids that participated, the question was, do you feel that others in the building care about you? And only 60% of the 273 kids said yes. And so I wanted to know, oh my God, what's going on? And I'm on the committee that sees these results. So I said to my kids, when you answered these questions, and so many of you said you didn't feel like people cared, talk to me about that. Tell me why do you feel that way? And man, I got a mouthful of, well, you care, Miss Bean. I know you care about us. I can see how much work you do for us and how the little things you do help us. But I feel like our peers don't care about us anymore. And that was like huge eye-opening, because I would have thought that they would have thought that their peers took the time to care about them.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I love Bill's reaction, Larry and Lynn, to that, but that somehow that doesn't surprise me. I think kids are wrapped up in their own digital worlds, and there's just less common connection, eye contact, shooting the breeze, bumping into each other in the line in the cafeteria. And COVID obviously has cut down on the connection, but
Well, yeah, and I could definitely concur about the freshmen. That they'll just walk out of a class if they're upset about anything.
Yeah,
And the next, I've heard so many more. We only make announcements looking for a kid when we already searched for the kid and we can't find them in the building.
yeah,
And I hear daily announcements, where it used to be like maybe once a month there'd be an announcement that we couldn't find somebody.
there's
And yeah, they just walk out of the building and then they go to wherever there's not a camera watching them.
you've said so much there, but I think, again, I think we want to talk about little granular solutions, but for me, and Broderick says this constantly, until we get more and more parents in this conversation in a given community, because we need parents' help. The schools cannot, Lynn, right? The schools are not gonna, we've tried to dry clean the kids for the last 20 years and it's not gonna work. It's just not gonna work. But
You know, I think Christine, the most important thing you just said was that when the kids said to you, it's the little things that you do. And I think that talking to kids about how do you show kindness in small ways on a daily basis. When schools were coming back after COVID and they were, everybody was worried about how were the kids going to adjust. I would say, I want you to implement brighten someone else's day. And I want everybody on Tuesday or Wednesday, everybody has to do 3 small things designed to brighten somebody else's day. And I think that's so lovely that you say, the kids say, well, it's the small things you do. It's not that you created this great lesson. It's not that whatever. It's they are watching you as a human being, making these genuine gestures of connection and caring. And that's what kids are looking for. And I think that, they're on their screens. I feel like adolescence is like a competition that we've put them in. It's this resume building competition of comparison. I think if we can start to talk to kids about how do you externally connect? How do you give? Volunteerism is one of the most effective treatments of depression. You get people to do something for somebody else. I just think that's a wonderful thing that they said to you.
Well, thank you. And I do think also if we could get them on the bandwagon of random act of kindness.
Yeah.
I mean, my daughter's a really sweet girl anyways, but I remember one day it was freezing cold, snowing. We're coming out of a grocery store. I can't wait to get to my car to get the heat on. And my daughter just stops at this little old lady trying to put groceries in her car and just was like, Mom, we need to help her. And I was like, yeah, it's just,
Yeah.
like, I was like, all right, but I'm freezing. But no, we helped her,
Miranda, I saw Miranda smile when you talked about random acts of kindness, and kids need to learn to be philanthropic and feel the joy of just simple connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to install that in the lives of kids. I think fundamentally none of this happens unless we as adults shut off the screens on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And shut them down and talk to our kids and just listen and listen to how they're really doing. I just think we're afraid to slow the tape down enough to say, and I feel guilty. Lynn, you're not a baby boomer by any means. McGowan maybe. I haven't cut him and counted the rings, but I think my generation has not done well in terms of stewarding the planet and the kids. And I think people feel guilty and they just don't want to talk about it. That's what I think, to be honest with you.
Well, and again, I think we've pathologized it so much that, when I go into schools and I talk to teachers, they're so afraid that they're going to do something wrong to some kid who's been diagnosed with depression. They're so worried that they're going to emotionally damage. They say to me all the time, well, how do I know if I should say something? Because I know this child is depressed, or I know this child is anxious, and I don't want to screw things up. And I mean, it's just this like you don't have to be an expert to just be kind to someone, you know? And I think we're so, it's been so pathologized. We're so afraid to connect, really. I mean, it's really this interesting thing, like you're afraid to connect. Yeah.
Yeah, no question. And yeah, I mean, this is complicated, you know.
Yeah.
The way teachers feel and the litigiousness of it all.
Yeah.
And a lot of parents who are good people, but are from life 720, life 360. 720 is when you can see you're sleeping. But from all of that, I think educators are on edge, and I think it's complicated. But
Yeah.
Miranda typed altruism is a great healer, right? It's in the chat, maybe just to me, I guess. And talk about free play.
Yeah.
Let kids just play.
Yeah.
But if you have Life 360, I mean, Lynn, you referenced you're in a habit of watching your kid. Why the playgrounds are empty, the frozen ponds are empty, empty, empty. We've said it every week, kids are overscheduled. The importance of play and independence, 6 I's, 5 C's, it's undeniable.
Yeah.
It's undeniable.
At the beginning of the pandemic, they were asking teenagers how they were doing, you know, in the first thing. And they were gathering some data, and kids said that there were 3 things that were going on. Teenagers said 3 things that were going on that they found positive. They said, we're getting more sleep during the lockdown. We're getting more sleep. We're using social media less, which was very surprising. And we're spending more time with family members than we've spent in a really long time, including their siblings. You think about it, like everybody has these activities that they go off to, and I mean, I have a client that I talked to. She is a junior in high school. She's an incredibly wonderful human being. She's doing this and this and this. Both her parents have careers that have, you know, not 9 to 5 hours. And she says she has dinner alone every night. She's got 2 younger siblings. They don't sit down and have dinner. People go into the freezer and pull something out and put it in the microwave.
Lynn, can I say something? I put it in the chat.
Yeah.
Just the Parkland phenomenon, to me, it was so striking. The shooting in Florida was what, Billy, maybe you remember 5 years ago, 6, 7, I don't, when Parkland, Florida was. I don't think Trump was the White House.
No.
So what did the kids in Florida start screaming? Can you grown-ups please do something about these guns? I just saw my buddy got shot in my arms. And what you're talking about, Lynn, what did the kids say? Hey, we got to be with our families. We got to get off the satanic devices. And what was the third thing that they said?
They got more sleep.
They were all sleep deprived, by the way. So I struggle always on these calls to give specific connection or suggestions. All I keep saying is shut off the screens, go to wherever your kids go to school, go support the principal and say, I want to come in here and help, and connect with your kids, friends, parents, and shut off the computers and take back the culture. And I know that's not specific and it's hard, but that's what, frankly, to be very honest with you, if we don't take back the culture in which kids are growing up, we're going to continue to have tragedies. And the obvious tragedy is the unmentionable one of self-harm. But the more subtle tragedy, and I've said it before, is that kids, there's so much buzz in their nervous systems that if they're in love with Van Gogh or they're in love with soccer, how are they going to know that? That's really what I think. It flattens me.
Yeah. The other thing too, I think is as people listen to this and people listen to the recording later, is that we talk about our own kids, right? So we talk about how we're going to parent our own kids. But one of the things when they look at the positive, so there's the ACEs, right? We all know about adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs. And then there's research on positive childhood experiences. they do more than sort of negate the ACE, they actually bolster up. So people who even had horrible, horrible childhoods, if they have a good amount of these positive childhood experiences, far less likely to be a depressed adult. And one of them that I think, and this sort of goes back to what Christine was saying too, is that if you as a child, even if you've got horrible stuff going on, if there are two non-parental adults that see you and connect with you for who you are, that genuinely care about you, that's one of the things that sort of, raises you up. And so we talk about like, what can we do for our kids, but we don't have to just do it for our kids. Like wherever you are, there are kids everywhere that are just looking for some adult to say like, you are awesome, or oh my gosh, I just love the way you do that, or isn't it amazing that you think about this or you manage that? Just such important things that we can do for all kids. This is what teachers are trying to do every day. Coaches are doing. Just if you've got nieces and nephews, they just need to hear from us that we see them for who they are. Yeah.
These are the assets, Lynn, right? That I think you're kind of referring to right in here.
Yeah, I can't see it because I don't have my reading glasses.
Oh, okay. Just the 40 developmental assets that have been going around for 15 or 20 years that I think you're referencing. That and the breakdown of community and connection is at the heart of all this stuff. And I know we only have 3 minutes, so I think it's the old saw, right? We each need to do in our own lives and the kids whose lives we impact, tell the truth, shut off the screens and listen. And I think if we
play, right? Laugh, play, be silly. It's the world is so serious right now. There's horrible things going on, but human beings have this amazing capacity to experience joy even amidst great suffering. Right? So be playful, show your kids how to do it. Yeah.
Well,
Mr. McGowan, you're going to have
math can be really boring, right? Higher level math. There's not a lot of excitement necessarily in the math class during the lesson.
Yeah.
But when I feel like the kids have just run out of juice, I'm like, stand up. And they're like, why are we standing up in math class? Because we're going to do 10 jumping jacks.
Right. Right.
And the whole class is just like up in an uproar.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. And then they sit down and they're like, oh my God, Miss Bean, it worked. So sometimes it is just those little things.
Yeah.
And then another one I think you could recommend to some of your parents is to force at least a couple nights a week dinner around the table, and everybody goes around and shares their favorite thing that happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing favorite happened, you're bound to hear nothing good happened to me today, and they'll dump what they weren't, what didn't go right. But when they do have a favorite part of their day, like everybody, it just warms you all to listen to it.
I have at the dinner table, the assignment I give the anxious families that I work with is, what was the unexpected thing that happened to you today and how did you manage it? Right. So we're not giving this idea that everything is supposed to go perfectly. I want them to be, this was a mess. Well, how'd you get through it? How'd you deal with it? Yeah.
peak resiliency, right?
That's right. Yeah. Little things matter. I mean, I think that, Jeff, we want to give helpful tips, but I think that if there's anything that we've all been saying as we've been sitting here talking for an hour, the problems feel really big and huge and overwhelming, but the solutions live in the small things that you do, right? I mean, you and I mean, we're not going to be able to get rid of Life 360, but if parents can just recognize that small things matter, small gestures matter, small changes matter, standing up and doing 10 jumping jacks matters. Yeah.
That's interesting. And that's a good hopeful note to end on. Did iPhone or Pam want to say anything? Yes, no, going once, twice. Mr. McGowan, Mr. Elliott, anything? Larry, are you reaching for the mute button, kid? No?
I just want to say thank you. This is a great conversation. I loved to listen to you guys.
Oh, thank you.
Mr. McGowan, anything?
No, thank you, but, he thought is, how do we reconnect and, not that we're slowly getting back to, the clubs and activities. And we have an Interact group that this past weekend, talk about acts of kindness, was out there doing a lot of community service. So how can we make sure and get more students involved in those activities? Because those are the activities that we need to go back. And, not that normal was good pre-pandemic, but there's a lot of things that we need to get back to. And I think we're slowly getting back to that. So let's, as bad as things seem to be, let's also continue to recognize those successes and promote those successes.
For sure.
Sounds good. Abby, thank you for producing this. And thank you all for coming. And Lynn, I'll thank you for coming on. I'll speak with you soon, everybody.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody. Good night.